The morning briefing room at Fort Henderson buzzed with the controlled energy of elite operators preparing for another high-stakes mission. Captain Megan Hayes sat perfectly upright in her chair, studying the terrain maps with laser focus, while the other officers lounged with the casual confidence of men who'd worked together for years. Her notepad was filled with precise handwriting questions about weather patterns, backup routes, and contingency plans that most would consider unnecessary. Intelligence confirms 8 American hostages held at this compound, Colonel Thompson announced, his laser pointer creating a small red dot on the satellite image. Extraction window is narrow, 3 hours maximum before enemy reinforcements arrive from the north. 20 pairs of eyes followed the movement of that red dot with practiced attention. These were the best of the best, Special Forces operators, who'd seen combat in 3 different theaters. When Colonel Thompson's pointer moved to highlight the mission leader, a murmur of approval rippled through the room. Captain Brandon Stone will lead the operation. Stone nodded confidently, his square jaw and chest full of commendation speaking to his reputation. 3 successful hostage extractions in the past year alone had made him something of a legend. Among the younger officers, he was exactly what Hollywood would cast as the perfect military commander: tall, broad-shouldered, with steely blue eyes that never seemed to blink. Hayes had served alongside Stone twice before, both times relegated to logistics support despite her combat experience. She'd completed successful extractions in Afghanistan and Iraq, but somehow those missions never made it into the informal stories shared over drinks at the officers' club. When Hayes raised her hand, several officers exchanged glances. Lieutenant Marcus Brooks, Stone's second-in-command, actually rolled his eyes. "Sir, I served in this region 18 months ago," Hayes said, her voice steady and professional. "These satellite images don't show the seasonal flooding that creates additional water barriers this time of year. We should consider alternative approach vectors." Colonel Thompson barely looked up from his notes. "Noted, Captain." Moving on to equipment assignments. As attention shifted back to the primary briefing, Brooks leaned toward Sergeant Kevin Martinez. "There's our diversity hire, checking another box," he muttered, just loud enough for nearby officers to hear. Hayes' expression remained perfectly neutral, though her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She'd heard variations of this comment dozens of times over her 8-year career. The first few times it stung like a physical blow. Now, she simply added it to the mental tally she kept evidence of what she was up against. She continued reviewing the mission parameters, while others broke into casual conversation about previous operations. Stone was already holding court, near the front of the room, regaling junior officers with stories from his last extraction. The tale grew more dramatic with each telling, Hayes noticed, though she'd read the actual after-action report. "Don't worry about keeping up tomorrow, Hayes," Brooks called out as the briefing concluded. "Stone's got this one handled. Just stay close to Martinez and try not to get in the way." Hayes gathered her notes methodically, ignoring the laughter that followed Brooks's comment. She'd learned long ago that responding only provided more ammunition for their casual cruelty. Excellence was her only defense, and even that seemed to invite resentment. In the equipment bay, Hayes began her ritual of preparation, while other team members grabbed standard issue gear with practiced efficiency. She carefully examined each piece of equipment. Her tactical vest was arranged with mathematical precision magazine pouches at the perfect height. Medical supplies easily accessible. Backup communications equipment secured in a waterproof pouch. "Planning to rewrite the mission while we're out there?" Brooks asked, passing by with his usual smirk. "Just being thorough, Lieutenant," Hayes replied without looking up. "Don't worry about it. This is Stone's show. All you need to do is stay quiet and look good for the after-action photos." Hayes didn't respond, but her movements became even more precise. She'd discovered that backup communications device during her previous deployment, a lightweight unit that could operate on alternative frequencies if standard comms were compromised. It had saved her unit's lives once before, though that story never made it into official reports either. "Expecting your radio to fail, Captain?" Stone asked, approaching with his characteristic swagger. "Just being prepared, sir," Hayes replied, echoing her earlier response. "Save the wait. My team doesn't have equipment failures." Stone's tone was friendly but dismissive. "First time on an operation this complex?" "No, sir. I've participated in similar extractions in 4 different countries." "Participated," Stone emphasized with a slight smile. "Well, stick close to Martinez. He'll make sure you stay safe." As Stone walked away, Hayes slipped the backup device into her pack anyway. Near the armory, she overheard 2 senior officers speaking in hushed tones, unaware she could hear them from around the corner. "Why is Hayes even on this mission?" Major Anderson asked. "Orders from above," Captain Williams replied with a sigh. "Gotta have at least one woman on high-profile ops these days. Don't worry, Stone knows to keep her away from any real action. She babysit the hostages once we secure them." Hayes zipped her equipment bag with more force than necessary, then headed toward the helicopter pad. Her face betrayed none of the frustration building inside her, but her hands had formed fists at her sides. 8 years of proving herself, and she was still seen as nothing more than a checkbox on someone's diversity report. The mission briefing had revealed more than tactical information. It had shown her exactly where she stood in the eyes of her colleagues. Tomorrow, deep in hostile territory with American lives at stake, she would once again have to fight 2 battles, one against the enemy and another against the prejudice of the very people who were supposed to have her back. As she walked across the tarmac toward the waiting helicopters, Hayes made a silent promise to herself. Whatever happened tomorrow, she would be ready. She would prove that she belonged there not because of some quota, but because she was exactly what this mission required. A leader who prepared for every contingency, who saw details others missed, and who never, ever gave up. The setting sun cast long shadows across the base, and Hayes felt the weight of tomorrow's mission settling on her shoulders. In less than 12 hours, 8 American lives would depend on this team working together. She only hoped that when the moment came, competence would matter more than prejudice. But deep down, she suspected she was about to find out exactly what she was made of. The pre-dawn air was thick with humidity as the team prepared for insertion. Hayes had been awake since 0300, running through mental rehearsals of every possible scenario. Her equipment check had been completed twice. Every piece of gear tested and retested, while other team members grabbed quick breakfasts and shared nervous jokes. She studied weather reports and updated intelligence summaries. The helicopters thundered through the morning sky, their rotors beating a steady rhythm that vibrated through Hayes' chest. Through the open door, she could see sheets of rain moving across the jungle canopy below, exactly the seasonal weather pattern she'd tried to warn about during the briefing. Captain Stone gave the signal, and one by one, the team fast roped down into the dense jungle. Stone led from the front with his usual confidence, while Hayes found herself positioned at the rear of the formation despite her regional experience. She said nothing about the arrangement, focusing instead on scanning the dense vegetation around them for signs of danger. "Remember, maintain radio protocol at all times." Stone's voice crackled over their units. "Radio check every 15 minutes. We stick to the plan." As they moved through the undergrowth, Hayes noticed fresh boot prints cutting across their path. The impressions were sharp-edged, unfilled by rain or debris-clear evidence of recent enemy movement. She held up a closed fist signal and pointed to the ground. "Sir," she said quietly into her "these tracks are recent. Multiple hostiles, moving parallel to our approach route. Stone barely glanced at the evidence when he came back to investigate. "Those are days old, Captain. Stick to the plan and maintain radio discipline." Hayes wanted to argue. The boot prints clearly showed tread patterns that would have been obscured by even light rainfall, and there had been heavy rain just 6 hours earlier. But challenging Stone's judgment in front of the team would only confirm their suspicions about her being a troublemaker. They pushed deeper into the jungle, but more warning signs appeared. Birds suddenly went silent ahead of them. Broken branches with sap still moist indicated hasty movement within the last few hours. Hayes grew increasingly vigilant, her hand never straying far from her weapon, but the team maintained Stone's original course. 40 minutes into the insertion, they reached a small clearing that offered their first glimpse of sky since landing. Lieutenant Brooks checked his GPS coordinates. "We're 2 kilometers out from the target," he reported. Stone nodded approvingly. "We'll hold here for 5 minutes. Check your gear, then we make our final approach." Hayes knelt at the edge of the clearing, scanning the tree line beyond. Something felt fundamentally wrong. The jungle had gone too quiet, and there was an unnatural stillness to the air that made her skin crawl. She was about to report her concerns when she noticed something that made her blood run cold. A thin wire, partially hidden by leaf litter, stretched across the path near Martinez's boot. "Tripwire," she whispered urgently. "Don't move, Martinez." The sergeant froze instantly, trusting her warning without question. Hayes slowly moved forward, tracking the wire to a crude but effective explosive device concealed in the underbrush. The device was freshly placed, she could tell by the clean metal surfaces and the way vegetation had been hastily arranged around it. "Sir," she called softly to Stone, "we have active enemy ordnance here. This definitely wasn't placed days ago." This time, Stone approached with more caution. After examining the device, he signaled for their demolitions expert to disarm it. His expression had grown noticeably more serious. "Good catch, Hayes," he said grudgingly. "Everyone, eyes sharp. They may know we're coming." The acknowledgement should have felt like a victory, but Hayes found herself more concerned about what the trap meant for their mission. If the enemy was actively monitoring their approach route and placing fresh obstacles, it suggested a level of organization and intelligence that hadn't appeared in their briefing materials. As the team prepared to move forward, Hayes noticed Brooks watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. For the first time since they deployed, his usual smirk was absent. The jungle seemed to close in around them as they advanced toward the target compound. Hayes found herself constantly scanning for more signs of enemy activity, her training and instincts ringing warnings that the official mission plan seemed determined to ignore. Every broken twig, every disturbed patch of ground, every moment of unnatural silence told the same story. They were walking into a carefully prepared trap. But when she tried to communicate these concerns to Stone, he dismissed them with increasing irritation. "Captain, you're seeing ghosts," he said during their second brief halt. Intelligence confirmed minimal enemy presence in this area. A few scattered sentries at most. "Sir, the evidence suggests otherwise," Hayes replied carefully. The bootprint patterns indicate at least 15 individuals moving in coordinated formations. The tripwire placement shows tactical sophistication. "And the timing?" "Enough," Stone interrupted. "I've led successful missions in this region before. I know what I'm dealing with." Brooks nodded in agreement. "Hayes, you're overthinking this. Stone's got 3 perfect extractions under his belt. Maybe trust the experience?" Hayes felt the familiar sting of dismissal, but this time it carried higher stakes than hurt feelings. 8 American hostages were counting on this team to reach them safely, and she was watching that possibility diminish with every ignored warning sign. As they resumed their advance, Martinez fell into step beside her. "You've been right about everything so far," he said quietly. "Keep watching our backs. It was the first time any team member had explicitly validated her observations, and Hayes felt a momentary surge of gratitude. But it was overshadowed by growing dread about what lay ahead. The target compound was less than an hour away, and with each step forward, Hayes became more convinced they were walking into something far more dangerous than anyone was prepared to handle. The only question was whether her warnings would be taken seriously before it was too late. The compound appeared through the dense foliage exactly where intelligence had indicated, but Hayes immediately noticed discrepancies that made her stomach tighten with apprehension. The satellite photos had shown a simple wooden structure with minimal security. What she observed through her binoculars was something entirely different. Fresh camouflage netting stretched between trees, creating concealed positions around the perimeter. Recently disturbed earth indicated new defensive emplacements. Most concerning of all, she counted at least 6 guard positions, far more than the minimal security described in their briefing. "Sir," she whispered into her comm, "I'm seeing significantly more defensive preparations than intelligence indicated." Stone's response crackled back with barely concealed irritation. "Hayes, we've been through this. Intelligence is solid. Stop second-guessing the mission parameters." Brooks chimed in from his position 20 meters to their left. "Maybe save the tactical analysis for after we complete the extraction." Hayes bit back her response, but Martinez caught her eye and gave a subtle nod. He'd seen the same discrepancies through his scope. So had Specialist Williams, judging by his increasingly tense posture as he surveyed the target area. The plan called for a direct approach, fast and aggressive, overwhelming any minimal resistance before extracting the hostages. It was the kind of bold strategy that had made Stone's reputation, but Hayes could see it was exactly what the enemy was prepared for. "Teams Alpha and Bravo, begin your approach," Stone commanded. "Hayes, you're with me on Overwatch until we secure the compound." There it was, the same old pattern. Keep the woman safely out of harm's way while the men handled the real action. But this time, Hayes realized it might actually save her life. Because what Stone was about to walk into looked very much like a carefully orchestrated ambush. As the assault teams moved forward, Hayes noticed movement in the tree line that none of them had spotted. Muzzle flashes from concealed positions. The distinctive outline of weapons being brought to bear on Stone's approaching team. "Contact left, contact left," she shouted into her radio, abandoning all pretense of radio discipline. The jungle erupted with gunfire before Stone could respond to her warning. Bullets tore through the foliage around the advancing teams, sending splinters of wood and shreds of leaves raining down. 2 soldiers immediately went down with cries of pain. "What the hell?" Stone's voice cut off as he scrambled for cover behind a fallen log. "Comms are being jammed," someone shouted as static filled their radio channels. Brooks's earlier confidence had evaporated completely. "Stone, we need orders. What's the plan?" But when Hayes looked toward their commanding officer's position, she saw something that chilled her more than the enemy gunfire. Stone was staring blankly ahead, his mouth moving but no commands coming out. His hands were shaking as he gripped his rifle. "Captain, we need orders." Lieutenant Brooks shouted again, genuine fear replacing his earlier arrogance. Stone blinked rapidly, but his 1,000-yard stare remained fixed on nothing. Hayes had seen this before, a rare but not unheard-of response to sudden overwhelming stress. Some soldiers froze completely when reality didn't match their expectations. A grenade explosion rocked their position, showering them with dirt and debris. One of the newer team members screamed as shrapnel tore into his leg. In the chaos, Hayes heard Brooks calling desperately for Stone to respond, but their commanding officer remained locked in his psychological shutdown. "LZ is compromised," Williams called out after checking his GPS coordinates. "Hostiles have our extraction point. The mission was falling apart around them. The hostages were still secured in the compound ahead. Their primary extraction point was under enemy control. Communications with base were completely cut off, and 2 soldiers were seriously wounded. Most critically, their commanding officer was experiencing complete psychological paralysis. Hayes assessed the deteriorating situation with the kind of clarity that only came in moments of absolute crisis. Someone needed to take command immediately, or they would all die in this jungle along with the hostages they'd come to save. She looked around at the faces of her teammates' men who had dismissed her, mocked her, and treated her like a liability for months. Now, those same faces were looking around desperately for leadership that wasn't coming from their frozen commander. Martinez caught her eye across the small depression where they'd taken cover. It gave her a slight nod, understanding passing between them without words. He'd seen her competence firsthand during training exercises. More importantly, he'd witnessed her accurate assessments of the tactical situation they'd ignored. "Hayes," he called out during a brief lull in the gunfire. "What do you think?" For the first time since deployment, every team member was looking at her expectantly, not with skepticism or dismissal, but with the desperate hope of soldiers who needed anyone to provide direction in chaos. Hayes felt the weight of the moment settling on her shoulders. This was it, the moment when all her preparation, all her ignored expertise, all her determination to prove herself would either save them or confirm every doubt they'd ever had about her capabilities. She thought about the backup communications device in her pack, the alternative extraction protocol she'd memorized, and the terrain knowledge that had been dismissed as overcautiousness. Everything that had made her seem paranoid and overprepared was exactly what this situation required. The enemy fire intensified, and somewhere in the distance, she could hear the hostages screaming. 8 American lives hung in the balance, along with the survival of every soldier in this clearing. Hayes made her decision. "Move the wounded behind that ridge," Hayes ordered, her voice cutting through the chaos with unexpected authority. "Brooks, take Wilson and Martinez secure our west flank. Williams, get those depression coordinates and establish covering fire to the south." Lieutenant Brooks hesitated, looking from Hayes to the still-frozen Captain Stone. Years of military hierarchy warred with the obvious necessity of following someone's orders. "Do what she says," Martinez shouted, already moving toward the western perimeter. "Move now." The urgency in Martinez's voice broke through Brooks's hesitation. He signaled to Wilson, and both soldiers immediately followed Martinez toward the Depotsen. Enemy positions, their earlier skepticism replaced by desperate professionalism. Hayes knelt beside Captain Stone, whose eyes had taken on the glassy stare she'd seen before in combat veterans experiencing acute stress reactions. "Sir," she said firmly, "I'm assuming tactical command until you're operational. Acknowledge, if you understand." Stone's eyes focused briefly on her face, and he gave a barely perceptible nod before looking away again. It wasn't much, but it was enough legal cover for what Hayes was about to do. She moved to the center of their makeshift perimeter and pulled out the backup communications device that Stone had mocked her for carrying. While bullets continued to strike nearby trees, she quickly entered a series of codes known only to those who had studied the most classified extraction protocols. "This is Tango 7 Alpha, authentication code Sierra November 847, she spoke clearly into the device. Emergency extraction required at alternate location. Grid coordinates to follow. Multiple casualties, civilians present. For a moment, it was only static, and Hayes felt several nearby soldiers watching her with expressions of doubt mixed with desperate hope. Then, a voice crackled through. "Tango 7 Alpha, this is Echo Base. Authentication confirmed. Standing by for coordinates." Relief flooded Hayes' face for just a moment before her professional mask returned. She relayed a series of numbers representing a clearing she'd noted during their approach, far enough from their current position to avoid the enemy concentration, but close enough that they might reach it before hostile forces could reposition. "Copy coordinates," the voice confirmed. "Extraction team deploying. ETA 90 minutes. Can you confirm hostage status?" "Negative," Hayes replied. "Moving to secure hostages now. We'll update." She turned to find several team members staring at her with something approaching awe. "How did you get through when our primary comms are jammed?" Specialist Rodriguez asked. "Different frequency range and encryption protocol," Hayes replied, already moving toward the compound. "They're blocking standard military channels, but this operates on diplomatic frequencies with different signal characteristics." She gestured to 3 soldiers. "Rodriguez, Williams, Johnson with me. We're securing the hostages. Everyone else, establish and hold this perimeter. We have 90 minutes to reach the new extraction point." As they prepared to move toward the compound, Brooks approached her. Gone was his usual dismissive attitude, replaced by something Hayes had never seen from him before: respect. "Hayes," he said quietly, "I was wrong about you. Dead wrong." "We can discuss it later, Lieutenant," Hayes replied. "Right now, let's get our people home." The approach to the compound required crossing 30 meters of open ground under intermittent enemy fire. Hayes led the way, using hand signals to coordinate their movement. When they reached this simple wooden structure, she could hear voices inside American voices calling out in fear. Williams placed a small breaching charge on the door lock while the others took position. The door blew open with a sharp crack, and they rushed inside to find 8 terrified civilians huddled against the far wall. "United States military," Hayes announced clearly. "We're getting you out of here." A middle-aged man who appeared to be their informal leader looked up with tears in his eyes. "Thank God. Are you really here to rescue us?" "Yes, sir," Hayes replied, already assessing their physical condition. "Is everyone able to move under their own power?" The man nodded. "Yes, but they've been bringing guards to check on us every hour. They're due back any minute." "Then we move now," Hayes decided. "Single file, stay low, follow my team exactly." As if to emphasize the urgency, gunfire erupted outside with renewed intensity. Hayes' radio crackled to life with Brooks's voice. "Captain, they're pushing hard from the north. We need to move." "Coming out with all hostages," Hayes replied. "Prepare to fall back to the extraction coordinates." She turned to the civilians, her voice calm but firm. "When we move, keep your heads down and do exactly as we say. No matter what happens, keep moving toward our soldiers. Do you understand?" They nodded, terror and hope warring in their eyes. Hayes checked her watch. 87 minutes until extraction. It should have been plenty of time, but she could hear the enemy fire intensifying around their perimeter. They were running out of time, and the most dangerous part of the mission was just beginning. As they prepared to leave the compound, Hayes caught sight of Captain Stone through the doorway. He was still in his same position, staring at nothing while chaos erupted around him. For a brief moment, she felt a pang of sympathy for the man, whose reputation had crumbled under pressure. But there was no time for sympathy now. 8 American lives depended on her getting them to safety, and Hayes had never failed a mission yet. She wasn't about to start now. "Move out," she ordered, and stepped into the jungle hell that would either make her a hero or kill them all. The next 10 minutes became a blur of controlled chaos as Hayes' team emerged from the compound with all 8 hostages. Enemy fire intensified the moment they appeared, bullets whining through the air around them as they rushed toward the perimeter where the rest of the team waited. Hayes positioned herself at the rear of the hostage group, physically shielding them with her body as they moved. One of the civilians, a young woman who couldn't have been more than 25, stumbled and fell. Without hesitation, Hayes hauled her to her feet and half-carried her toward the relative safety of the fallen log where teammates had established their defensive position. "Enemy forces approaching from multiple directions," Martinez reported. "As they reached cover, they're trying to surround us." Hayes pulled out her map, calculating distances and time with the precision of someone who had studied every possible scenario. "We need to reach this extraction point in 75 minutes, she said, pointing to the coordinates she transmitted to base. "The terrain suggests this route offers the best cover, but we'll need to cross that clearing." Brooks studied the open ground she'd indicated. "That's suicide. We've got wounded soldiers and civilians. It's too exposed." "It's our only option," Hayes replied. "We split into 3 groups. I'll lead the first group across to establish a defensive position on the far side. Martinez, you bring the second group with the hostages. Brooks, your team, provides covering fire and brings up the rear with the wounded. That puts you in the most exposed position," Martinez observed quietly. "I know the terrain best," Hayes said simply. "We move in 3 minutes." As the team prepared for the dangerous crossing, Captain Stone approached Hayes. His color had returned somewhat, and his eyes had regained their focus, though his hands still trembled slightly. "Captain," he said in a low voice, "I'm operational." Again, Hayes studied him carefully. "Are you sure, sir?" "Yes," he swallowed hard. "But you should remain in tactical command. The team is responding to your leadership, and—" He paused, the admission clearly difficult. "You've made better decisions than I would have." The acknowledgement cost him, but Hayes recognized the courage it took to make such a statement. "I'll get 'em out, sir." "All of them?" Stone nodded. "I know you will." Hayes gathered her assault team at the edge of the clearing. "On my signal, we cross fast and establish covering positions. Keep spacing, stay low, and whatever happens, keep moving." She took a deep breath, then burst from cover in a low sprint toward the exposed ground ahead. The others followed, spreading out to minimize their target profile. Almost immediately, bullets began kicking up dirt around them as concealed enemy gunners spotted their movement. Halfway across, Specialist Johnson took a hit to the shoulder and went down hard. Without hesitation, Hayes changed direction, reached the fallen soldier, and hoisted him to his feet. "Keep moving," she ordered, half carrying him toward the tree line while bullets snapped through the air around them. They reached cover with no further casualties, and Hayes immediately positioned her team to provide covering fire for the next group. "Martinez, move now," she called into her radio. The sergeant led the hostages across the clearing at a dead sprint. The civilians, terrified but determined, kept pace admirably while Hayes' team laid down suppressive fire at every muzzle flash they spotted in the surrounding jungle. Remarkably, Martinez's entire group made it across unharmed. But as Brooks prepared to bring the final team across with the wounded, enemy fire suddenly intensified from a new direction. "They're flanking us from the north," shouted a panicked soldier. Hayes immediately assessed the new threat, her mind calculating angles and distances with mathematical precision. "Rodriguez, shift your fire 15 degrees north, concentrate on that tree line. Williams, I need suppressive fire on our rear approach." Brooks's team started across the clearing, 2 soldiers carrying a third who couldn't walk on his own. They were halfway across when a grenade landed just meters from their position. "Grenade!" someone screamed. Without thinking, Hayes broke from cover and sprinted toward the endangered men. Time seemed to slow as she reached the explosive device, scooped it up in one fluid motion, and hurled it back toward the enemy position. The explosion sent dirt and debris raining down, but at a safe distance from her teammates. "Move! Move!" Hayes shouted, practically pushing Brooks's team towards safety as enemy bullets tore through the space around them. When they finally reached the tree line, Brooks looked at her with something approaching reverence. "That was insane," he said, breathing hard. "You could have been killed." "We could all be killed," Hayes replied simply. "Now we keep moving." Captain Stone, who had crossed with Martinez's group, approached Hayes with renewed respect in his eyes. "What's our status?" "4 wounded, but all mobile. All hostages accounted for. Extract team will be at coordinates in 48 minutes, but we still have 2 kilometers of hostile territory to cover." Stone nodded, fully deferring to her tactical judgment. "And enemy forces. Unknown number, but they're well equipped. And highly motivated," Hayes replied, checking her map again. "This ravine should provide cover for the next leg of our movement." As they prepared to continue their desperate escape, Hayes caught sight of the hostages watching her with expressions of awe and gratitude. These people, complete strangers, were depending on her to get them home safely. For the first time in her military career, Hayes felt the full weight of command settling on her shoulders. Not the burden of proving herself to skeptical colleagues, but the responsibility of leadership itself. Lives hung in the balance, and she was the one making the decisions that would determine whether they lived or died. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. This was what she had trained for, what she had endured years of dismissal and condescension to achieve. Now, in the middle of hostile jungle with bullets flying around them, she had finally found her moment to lead, and she was going to make damn sure she didn't waste it. As dawn broke through the jungle canopy, Hayes' exhausted team pushed forward through increasingly difficult terrain. The ravine she'd chosen provided excellent cover from enemy observation, but the rocky ground slowed their progress significantly. With wounded soldiers and terrified civilians in tow, every step became a calculated risk. Hayes led from the front, using her knowledge of the region to navigate around obstacles that would have trapped a less experienced commander. When a hostage stumbled on the loose rocks, she personally helped them forward. When ammunition ran low, she redistributed supplies with tactical precision that kept everyone combat ready. The extraction point was less than 500 meters ahead when enemy fire erupted from their right flank with devastating intensity. "Take cover," Hayes ordered as bullets slammed into nearby trees, sending bark and splinters flying through the morning air. She quickly assessed their tactical situation, her mind working through possibilities with the clarity that came from months of ignored preparation finally proving its worth. The enemy had somehow managed to position forces between her team and their extraction point, exactly the kind of adaptive response that suggested sophisticated command and control. "Options?" Captain Stone asked, now fully functioning as her second in command. Hayes' eyes narrowed as she studied the terrain ahead. "We create a diversion. I'll take a small team and draw their fire while you lead the main group to the extraction point." "That's a suicide mission," Brooks protested, his earlier skepticism completely replaced by genuine concern for her safety. "No, it's a calculated risk," Hayes corrected him. "Martinez, Rodriguez with me. Everyone else, prepare to move on my signal." Martinez and Rodriguez exchanged glances, then nodded with the firm resolve of soldiers who had witnessed Hayes' competence firsthand. Both men had come to trust her tactical judgment implicitly over the past few hours. Hayes quickly outlined her plan. They would move parallel to the enemy position, create noise and movement to draw attention, then circle back to rejoin the main group. "We go loud for 30 seconds, then disappear," she instructed. "Make them think we're a larger force trying to flank their position." Stone gripped her shoulder with unexpected emotion. "We'll be ready to move the moment they shift." "Focus." Hayes checked her watch. "Extraction in 18 minutes. Don't wait for us if we're not there." "We're not leaving without you," Stone said with a firmness that surprised everyone, including himself. She met his eyes for a moment, recognizing something she'd never seen there before: genuine respect and concern for her as both a soldier and a person. 3 minutes, she said. "Get everyone ready." Hayes, Martinez, and Rodriguez moved silently through the undergrowth, circling wide around the enemy position. The jungle had taught Hayes patience over her previous deployment, the ability to move without sound, to become part of the environment itself. When they reached the designated point, Hayes gave a hand signal. All three pulled grenades from their vests, preparing to execute a diversion that would either save their teammates or get them all killed. "On my mark," she whispered. 3.2.1 mark. The grenades sailed through the air in different directions, detonating in a staggered sequence that suggested a much larger attacking force. Immediately, they opened fire from multiple positions, moving constantly to create the illusion of superior numbers. The enemy responded exactly as Hayes had predicted, turning their attention away from the extraction point to address this new threat. Over their comms, they heard Stone's voice. "Moving now. Enemy is redirecting." For 30 seconds, Hayes' small team maintained the deception, their disciplined fire creating chaos in the enemy ranks. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, they melted back into the jungle, using the noise of their own diversion to cover their withdrawal. Behind them, confused enemy fire continued to pepper the empty forest where they had been. "Captain, extraction. Point is clear," Stone reported over the radio. "Helicopters on approach. What's your position?" 300 meters southeast, Hayes responded, breathing hard as they moved through the dense vegetation. "Moving to rejoin now." In the distance, the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors filled the air. 2 Blackhawks descended through the morning mist, their doors open and door gunners scanning the tree line for threats. Hayes' team sprinted the final distance as the first helicopter touched down. Hostages were already being loaded aboard, with wounded soldiers given priority. Stone directed the operation with restored confidence, but his eyes kept scanning the jungle for Hayes' team. When they burst from the tree line, visible relief passed over Stone's face. "Move! Move!" he shouted, gesturing toward the waiting aircraft. As they crossed the clearing, enemy fire erupted again from the forest behind them. Rodriguez took a hit to his leg and stumbled, but Hayes immediately turned back, hoisted him over her shoulder in a fireman's carry, and continued toward the helicopter without missing a step. "Covering fire," Stone ordered, and several soldiers laid down suppression as Hayes carried Rodriguez the remaining distance. She handed the wounded man to the waiting crew, then turned to ensure everyone else was aboard. Only when she confirmed that all hostages and team members were accounted for did she finally climb into the helicopter herself. As the aircraft lifted off, bullets pinged against its armored underside, but they were airborne and safe. Inside the crowded compartment, an unusual silence fell as the reality of their escape sank in. Then one of the hostages, the middle-aged man who had served as their informal leader, reached out and grasped Hayes' hand. "Thank you," he said simply, tears streaming down his face. "You saved our lives." Hayes nodded, her professional mask still in place, but those who looked closely could see the emotion in her eyes. She had done what she set out to do. She had brought them all home. Captain Stone made his way through the packed helicopter and sat beside her, his voice barely audible over the rotor noise. "I owe you an apology," he said, his earlier arrogance completely absent. "And much more than that." "You don't owe me anything, sir," Hayes replied. "We all have our moments." "No," Stone shook his head firmly. "We don't all step up like you did." He looked around at the wounded but alive soldiers and the rescued hostages. "This is all because of you. Every life in this helicopter." Hayes felt something shift inside her chest. Not the hollow satisfaction of proving a point, but the deep fulfillment that came from knowing she had made a difference when it mattered most. For the first time in her career, she wasn't thinking about what others thought of her abilities. She was simply grateful that her preparation and instincts had been enough to bring everyone home. As Fort Henderson appeared on the horizon, Hayes realized that everything was about to change. There would be debriefings, reports, and official recognition. But more importantly, she had finally crossed the invisible line from being tolerated to being respected, not because of her gender or any diversity initiative, but because she had proven herself where it counted most. The mission that was supposed to be Stone's triumph had become her defining moment. And judging by the way her teammates were looking at her, they all knew it. The base medical facility buzzed with controlled urgency as doctors treated the wounded from the mission. Hayes sat in a quiet corner, methodically completing her after-action report while still wearing her mud-caked uniform. Despite the cuts and bruises covering her arms and face, she had refused medical attention until everyone else had been seen first. Her report was a masterpiece of professional understatement. Captain Stone's temporary incapacitation was mentioned clinically, without judgment or elaboration. Her own actions were described with equal neutrality facts only, no embellishment or self-promotion. To anyone reading the dry military language, it would seem like just another successful extraction with minor complications. Colonel Thompson approached as she finished, his expression unreadable. He had already spoken with the hostages, the medical team, and several of the soldiers. The preliminary reports he'd received painted a picture so different from the mission briefing that he'd initially thought there had been some mistake. "Captain," he finally said, setting her report aside after a quick scan, "this doesn't do justice to what I've been hearing from everyone else." Hayes met his gaze directly. "It contains all relevant tactical information, sir. That's not what I mean." Thompson leaned against the wall, studying her with new interest. "I've been conducting preliminary debriefs with every person on that mission. Every single one tells the same story. You're the only reason they're alive." "I was just doing my job, sir." "No," Thompson replied with conviction. "You did far more than your job." He pulled a folder from under his arm. "Captain Stone has submitted a formal request for transfer. He specifically recommended you take command of the unit." Hayes's carefully maintained composure faltered for just a moment. "Sir?" He was quite insistent, Thompson continued. "Said there was no one better qualified to lead that team." He handed her the folder. "I'm inclined to agree, based on the evidence." Hayes accepted the folder wordlessly, too stunned to form an adequate response. Command of her own unit, the recognition she'd worked toward for 8 years, was finally within reach. "I appreciate the confidence, sir," she managed. "It's not about confidence, Captain. It's about recognizing excellence when we see it." Thompson straightened. "Take 48 hours for rest, then report to me for a full briefing on your first mission as unit commander." As he turned to leave, Thompson paused. "Oh, and Hayes? That backup communications equipment you carried. I'm making it standard. Issue for all teams. Seems you were right about redundancy planning." After he left, Hayes sat alone with the folder in her hands, processing what had just happened. She thought about all the times she'd been dismissed, all the doubts cast on her abilities, all the extra preparation she'd done just to be taken seriously. Now, in the span of one mission, everything had changed. 3 days later, Hayes entered the mess hall and felt the familiar weight of eyes upon her. But this time, something was fundamentally different. Instead of the mixture of skepticism and resentment she'd grown accustomed to, she saw genuine respect in the faces looking her way. Captain Stone, his arm in a sling from a wound sustained during the extraction, slowly stood as she approached. He offered a silent, respectful salute, Not the perfunctory gesture of military protocol, but something deeper. One by one, other soldiers followed suit, not out of obligation, but from genuine recognition of what she had accomplished. As Hayes took her seat, she overheard a newly arrived lieutenant ask his companion, "Is that the token woman officer I heard about?" The response came immediately from multiple voices around the table. "That's Captain Hayes. Show some respect." Lieutenant Brooks, sporting a bandage across his forehead, added with surprising firmness, "She's the reason we're all sitting here instead of rotting in that jungle. Remember that." Hayes ate her meal quietly, still uncomfortable with the attention, but recognizing the significant shift it represented. When she finished and stood to leave, Brooks approached her table. "Captain," he said, visibly struggling to find the right words, "I wanted to say that I was wrong about you. Dead wrong. And I'm grateful that you didn't hold it against us when it mattered." "We're a team, Lieutenant," Hayes replied simply. "That's all that matters." 6 months later, Hayes stood at the head of the same briefing room that had once felt so unwelcoming. Now it had a completely different energy. Her team included several women who had requested transfers to serve under her command, alongside men who had witnessed her leadership firsthand during that jungle extraction. "Intelligence confirms 12 hostages held in this facility," Hayes explained, pointing to a satellite image displayed on the main screen. "But our sources suggest the structure may be heavily fortified." "What's our approach, Captain?" asked one of her new team members. "We'll insert here, 5 kilometers from the target," Hayes replied, her planning as meticulous as ever. "Lieutenant Brooks's team will establish our communications relay on this ridge, while Martinez leads reconnaissance from the east. We'll maintain triple redundancy on all communication systems." Her focus remained on preparation and contingencies. The very qualities that had once earned her dismissal now brought her respect and confidence from her subordinates. When she finished outlining the operation, her team dispersed to prepare with an efficiency that reflected their trust in her leadership. Colonel Thompson entered as the room cleared, accompanied by several visiting military officials. "Captain Hayes," he called, "a moment of your time." She approached the group, standing at attention. "Gentlemen, this is Captain Hayes," Thompson said to the visitors, "one of our finest commanders." The introduction contained no qualifiers, no explanations about diversity or representation, just simple acknowledgement of her abilities. The officials nodded respectfully, having already heard about the legendary jungle extraction that had become required reading at the War College. After the briefing, a young female lieutenant approached Hayes in the corridor. "Captain, may I ask you something?" Hayes nodded. "Of course, Lieutenant. How did you deal with being seen as a token for so long? Didn't it make you angry?" Hayes considered the question carefully. So many possible answers crossed her mind: the frustration, the extra hours of preparation, the constant need to prove herself. But none of that seemed important anymore. "I never saw myself that way," she finally answered. "I only saw what I could contribute." Eventually, they saw it too. The lieutenant nodded thoughtfully. "Thank you, ma'am." As Hayes walked away, she passed a wall displaying photographs of the unit's commanders through the years. Her picture had recently been added, the first woman among them. But someday, she knew, not the last. She didn't pause to look at it. The acknowledgement that mattered most wasn't on that wall, but in the eyes of the soldiers who trusted her with their lives. The same soldiers who had once seen her as nothing more than a checkbox on someone's diversity report now looked to her for leadership, guidance, and the kind of tactical excellence that brought everyone home alive. Captain Megan Hayes had never needed anyone to call her anything other than what she truly was, a leader. The jungle mission had simply given her the opportunity to prove what she'd always known about herself. Sometimes that's all it takes, one moment when competence matters more than prejudice, when results speak louder than assumptions. In the end, she had earned something far more valuable than their respect. She had earned the right to lead, and the knowledge that when the next crisis came, her team would follow her anywhere. Because they had learned what she had always known. Excellence has no gender. Courage knows no boundaries, and true leadership reveals itself when everything is on the line. The token officer was gone. In her place stood exactly what the mission had always required: a commander who never gave up, never backed down, and never left anyone behind. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.